All right, everybody, we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome to the UCF ECHO session, Cultural Considerations and AAC. Very glad to have you. We'd like to remind everybody we are recording this session for dissemination and later viewing. That session will be posted to our YouTube channel where you're able to view it sometime later this week. We want to thank our funder, the WITH Foundation. They funded this entire series, all the CEU credits, and the stipends to all of our wonderful subject matter experts who participated in the series with us. Just a couple of reminders. We do recommend closing any additional applications that you might have open on your computer that might drain your bandwidth, just to help free up some resources on your device. We will have time for question and answers at the end of the presentation. But if you do think of something while you're watching, please go ahead and submit it through the chat function on your Zoom screen. We will be keeping track of those for you. And we do ask that people remain muted throughout the presentation to make it easier for everyone else to follow along. We are, as part of the ECHO series, we do have a survey that we're releasing looking at information about continuing ed and information about how you all are accessing it right now. So if you do have a moment, we're dropping that link in the chat as well. Please go ahead and fill that out for us. There will be a post-session link that we drop at the end of the presentation as well. Finally, I am very pleased to introduce Dr. Cohn. We want to give special credit to her. Her original session in the series was canceled due to one of our hurricanes, and she's been very generous in rescheduling with us and actually adding to her presentation to increase the length to cover all of our new DEI CE requirements. So a special thank you to Dr. Cohn for today's presentation. And very briefly, she is a professor adjunct in communication rhetoric for the University of Pittsburgh and the University of Maryland Global Campus. She's co-authored a number of books on communication and culture, telerehabilitation, and communication science and disordered case books, as well as video fluoroscopy and cleft palate. We are very appreciative of Dr. Cohn's time today, and I'm going to turn it over to you to get started.
Carolyn, thank you so much. Let me get my screen up. Let's see. There we go. Does that look, we're looking for the slideshow here. There we go. So I'm very pleased to be with you all. I had the opportunity to teach adjunct at UCF a very long time ago in cleft palate. Loved your campus, loved the students, and Orlando is one of my favorite places. So I wish I could be there with you right now, but I'm really happy to be Zooming. And Carolyn and Julie, you've been just wonderful. I know it takes a lot of preparation to get a talk going, especially to redo the CEs for ASHA. So thanks for doing that. Okay, so let's move on here. You already have an idea of who I am, I guess, and you're going to have the slides after. So anything that I don't cover exactly, you could go back and look at. So let me move it. There's my email. Please be in touch if I can ever be helpful to any of you. So now I'm obligated to give my conflict of interest declaration, which is kind of like an introduction, okay? Financial relationships. I get speaking fees from this and other conferences, book royalties, but you're never gonna get rich on book royalties. So I just want you to know that if you're thinking about it. Telerehabilitation from Springer, tele-AAC from Plural Press, another book from Plural Press, Fundamentals of AAC, a case-based approach, a book on diversity and remote learning is in preparation right now with Springer Nature or Palgrave. I'm not sure what they're gonna call the publisher yet. I get salary from my teaching. And then non-financial relationships. I'm a life member of ASHA, which means I'm kind of old. I'm founder of the ASHA SIG 18 on telepractice, and I'm a committee member of the Mid-Atlantic Telehealth Resource Center called Matrix. Each region of the country has one of these that they can relate to. It's free, wonderful conferences, multidisciplinary. I recommend it. And I'm editor of the open source, which means it's free, International Journal of Telerehabilitation. And I've done that since 2008 as a founding editor, that we started that with a grant. So that's really a fun thing to work on. Okay, so this is really important, I think, given our political circumstances in the world and in the States. I am talking to you about what's happening in March 2023. Okay, things could change in April. I mean, we know our culture is pretty fluid right now. I'm not giving you any legal advice. Okay, this is for informational and educational purposes only. I'm not licensed in Florida. I'm licensed in Pennsylvania, although I'm giving this from the Jersey Shore, where I live with my 99-year-old World War II vet dad. Take care of him. So, you know, I think we can acknowledge, though, that the environment is really complicated. It's changeable. It varies state by state. If you know one state, you know one state. That's how the axiom goes. So, and I'll say this more than once, please practice within the confines of your state and federal law. We can practice, most of us, except in the VA and the Department of Defense, because we have state licensure. And if we do something that really upsets the state, our licensure could be taken away individually. Okay, so it's especially important to not violate state law. Okay, so now the learning objectives, these are what was submitted to ASHA, but I've gone beyond this. We're going to talk about primary and secondary aspects of culture. We're going to talk mainly about the Purnell's model, but not too long because models can get boring, right? We're going to talk about how do we assess our own cultural humility, how some strategies to normalize AAC communication within a diverse elementary school. And at this point, I want to be real clear that I'm not an AAC expert. I publish with folks in AAC, friends with them, but I'm not in the trenches like you all are. And I really respect what you're doing. And I'm going to talk about examples of culturally responsive vocabulary selection for a user's AAC device. But we're going to go beyond all these learning objectives. Okay, so it's important, I think, to give acknowledgements. Let me just go back there. Okay, so because to give you a sense of where I'm coming from, and good people you can contact if you need to. So this is Dr. Jack Gary's. He's also a minister. We've written a book together, Communication is Culture. It's a book for intro communication courses. But what he's done that applies to this presentation, he's written essays about religious considerations and vocabulary for the AAC textbook, the one on fundamentals. And, you know, he'll call me up and say, well, Ellen, what's going on in the Jewish religion about this or that? And I call him up for advice about Christian religion. So, you know, we have that kind of great relationship. We used to have lunch twice a week, but now with COVID and distance, we can't. He's a great person. Now, here's two other terrific people. We met in a Provost Diversity Fellows seminar. Maybe your institutions have that, where for 2 weeks we just talked about how do we throw diversity into our curricula in a very integrated fashion. It was sort of syllable based. So at that point, I became a colleague and friends with Jerome Branch, and he's the first person up here, and John Mullinex. And we decided, hey, we can, you know, we're sort of the senior people here. Let's write a book about this. So we got 50 chapter authors to write how they were including curricula, diversity into the curricula. And it's an old book, it's 2007. And if you find it online, it's probably, you could find a really used copy 5 times over, and it should be like $2 or something. So, but now I'm working on another book with Jerome. John wants to retire, so he's not working on that. But we added Paula Davis, you'll see her picture in a second, and it has to do with diversity in higher education, remote learning, because we found that during COVID, you know, things really changed with how we were teaching, and how do you include diversity in an online forum. So we're working on that now. I'm expecting that probably in probably the fall. So there you can see Paula Davis, just a fabulous colleague. She's Associate Vice Chancellor for Diversity and Inclusion in the Health Sciences. And incredible, I hope every university should have someone like her. She's amazing. And Mario Brown as well. And he is now the Dean for Equity, Engagement, and Justice and Associate Professor in Pharmacy and Therapeutics, where I also taught. And so the two of them have been incredible resources. And again, they've written for the AAC book, and they've just, they're really tops in the field. Okay, so now also I'm contributing to this presentation, although you won't see it exactly overtly, is Ovetta Harris from Howard University and Dorian Lee Wilkerson from Hampton University. I switched their sequence here, and they would actually for 10 years fly. Well, Dorian would take 4 flights, okay, to talk to my 2 classes on diversity and biases, and it was wonderful for my students to experience her. And also Ovetta, who was a chairman, maybe she still is at Howard University, would come the same day. So between the two of them, my students the population isn't very diverse in Pittsburgh. Some of them had never had an African-American faculty member. So the two of them were just, phenomenal for them to meet. And that picture up there, that's the Cathedral of Learning. It really looks like a cathedral when you walk in it. So the two of them have contributed to my cultural awareness, and they never shame me when I say something stupid. We're all still learning. Okay, so now I'll get to the AAC colleagues that have been helpful for this presentation. We have co-editors Narissa Hall, Jennifer Jengling Sudkamp, her name's tough, Michelle Gutman. And we've worked on 2 books together, and they've been really, fabulous colleagues. And the Tele AAC book, I was in there because of the Tele part, and the fundamentals of AAC, I have 14 essays in there on culture, gender, and religion. So they've been wonderful colleagues, and they're allowing me to put that content in has contributed to this. And finally, there's an AAC expert that I've been in touch with, Catherine Fredericks, and we needed a case study for this, so I used one that was similar to what we've used in one of our books, and then Catherine helped solve it. So you have a good solution here. Okay, so now I also want to tell you about some really great resources. This first one is well, there's a different title, but they're all the same pretty much. Transcultural healthcare. I guess that's kind of blurred. There we go. It has a huge amount of ethnicities and religions in the book, and it talks about all kinds of issues. It's very detailed, and again, if you get an older version of it for less money, it's still going to be pretty much up to date. And then there's a book by Molly Mindel and Jeva John, AAC for All Culturally and Linguistically Responsive Practice. That's from Plural Press. And I really recommend that. That has, a lot of information about culture. And then a book that I've not quoted here, but it's really a very classic book, anything by Donald Wing Su. He's one of the first ones to popularize, in a sense, microaggressions. Okay, and so if you want to know more about microaggressions, that's a great book. And then at the bottom, I put an ASHA link to their Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion collection. They have a lot of content and programming. It's always changing. So ASHA has a lot of good things. They don't have so much about state regulations, but in general, you can rely on them for a lot of basic information. So now let's talk about culture. What is culture? Well, the better question is, what isn't culture? Okay, culture is just everywhere. It encompasses all of our experience, as human beings in a specific society. Examples, okay, how we're dressed today, what we eat. You're eating lunch, I hope, as I'm talking. How we behave, okay, how we worship, how we're treated as babies and raised into adulthood, how we die, how we communicate both verbally and non-verbally. So I've injected some non-verbal communication content into the presentation. So culture influences how we perceive, okay, our physical world, as well as our intellectual, psychological, and social aspects of our lives. Culture is everything. There's hardly anything that isn't culture. So I've got some technical stuff on top of my title, but let's see. Okay, this session views culture in the broadest possible sense. Okay, it's not just culture and AAC, it's the culture that AAC operates in. Speech language pathology and AAC exists within culture. I put a capital C, okay, like deaf, capital D. Culture is a big deal. And there's so many constituents that we relate to, and each of them have different cultures. They can have different cultures. The AAC user, the friends of the AAC user, and their family members. And there's intergenerational differences a lot. And AAC teachers and aides, their religious institutions and leaders that they relate to, their technical staff, healthcare staff. That's just part of it. The cultures that we relate to are just so numerous. And then there's the environmental culture. So we all are aware of the political environment that we are operating in, the cultures of insurance and payers that could be influenced by legislators, by lobbyists. There's institutions that each of them have cultural aspects, and within them, lots of subcultures. So culture is important because we're not just, it's important not to just think of it as AAC and culture, because we're all operating in this mega universe of different cultures. Okay, so now a characteristic of culture is that it changes. It's fluid. I have a lot of students that just don't watch TV. They don't read the newspaper. I wonder, they're very good on types of culture that I'm not, like music groups and gaming, but they're not keeping abreast, some of them, on current events. And so we need to do that as well. We need to keep current with the culture that our students and clients are engaged with. Culture is comprised of symbols, verbal codes, nonverbal codes, artifacts, okay? And they could be arranged in different ways to communicate. Culture is rule governed, all right? So usually the rule may be explicit or it may be implicit, but when and it's harder with implicit rules. Like, for example, when you go to a meeting, you sort of figure out, don't sit in the chair that's the dean's chair, right? That wouldn't be appreciated. Or Thanksgiving dinner, mom or dad sits in a certain seat. And if you're engaged to someone in the family or with them, you don't want to sit in their seat, but maybe no one told you about that. So implicit rules can be violated, and sometimes they're more offensive to people when violated than the explicit rules. So culture is created by humans and by our communication. In fact, they're two sides of the same coin, culture and communication. Culture affects how we communicate. Communication can change the culture. So they're not the same, but they're like two parts of the same coin. Now, culture is influential across our lifespans and even before birth. Like some cultures, some families decide they want to have children at a certain age. Some decide that they're going to take prenatal vitamins, or they're going to get genetic testing. There's a lot of stuff that happens before a baby's born that is part of the culture, and even how they're born, the medical support given. So it also influences death rituals, okay, and how we honor those who've passed. So really, it's a lifelong adventure to keep current with culture. Culture, how do we learn it? Well, there's something, it's famous in the communication world. It's called the hidden curriculum by Gerber. Sometimes we learn culture by direct teaching. So say please, or please clean up your table when you're done, or these are things that we're actually taught. And kindergarten's really good about that, right? We learn a lot. There's a lot of direct teaching. But the vast amount of our learning about culture occurs indirectly by living in the culture, by being able to observe what goes on and then understand it. And again, some of our clients may not have that ability to perceive and learn from what they're watching. So, or they may not have visual acuity. So it's important that learning is really lifelong. We never stop learning. And hopefully we become better at understanding how culture operates, becoming even more diplomatic, and knowing what the rules are. But we also know that we're supposed to ask about what are the rules. I'd love to come to your house for Thanksgiving. Tell me about that. What kind of gift should I bring? Should I bring food or not? Should I help clean up after dinner? How does your family feel about humor? There's a lot of stuff that just before we go to someone's home and don't know them, it helps to have a cultural informant. So now the question I posed here is, can a person become totally fluent in another culture without being born and raised there? Yes or no? I'm not doing polling today. I've kept away from tech stuff, but I'm sure you're thinking about it. My answer to that is no. You need to understand how you're raised in a culture. Diplomats get a lot of education and they're often very, very good at figuring this out. But to be fluent in another culture, it's helpful to have been part of that culture. There's certain people in our society that are pretty fluent in other cultures. Like, for example, usually a pope is. My students identify the living pope as being someone who could relate to many different cultures. There we go. I can see that now. Okay, so let's talk about some nonverbal communication. That is very important in culture. In fact, it's estimated that 93% of communication is nonverbal. Now, for any of you who are going for a doctorate that you need a thesis, this is an old study, okay? And I think it needs to be redone. But it's pretty true that most of our communication is nonverbal, and you'll start to see it as I go through different categories. So nonverbal communication, NVC for short, can be very primitive. It's influential through human development. Like babies cry. If babies didn't cry or smile, people wouldn't take care of them as much, right? They are dependent on adults for a long period of time before they can talk to us. They have different cries and different expressions. And nonverbal communication is also primitive across the animal species, like phylogenetically. So there's a lot of communication that happens with animals, and they're not using words. Although I've watched a dog able to press buttons and audibilize different words and phrases. A speech language pathologist has been working on that. But generally, we know if our dog needs to go out, right? They're barking at the door. They have tremendous communication possibilities. Ants communicate with each other. Even there's some feeling that trees are communicating and helping each other out. I don't know how conscious that is, but there's some really interesting stuff being written about how trees cooperate through different fungi, I guess. So now, what do we trust more, verbal or nonverbal communication? Most people would say they trust the nonverbal, okay? And it's not what you say, it's what you do, it's how you look. And sometimes these decisions are made like very quickly and unconsciously. So let's talk about classifications of nonverbal communication. Kinesics relates to movement. We can actually influence kinesics. So if I'm in a meeting and I want to show some synchrony with the director, I could assume the same posture. And when that person moves, I can move, okay? Very concerning if they start to cross their arms. That's usually, maybe I said something wrong. We can do that consciously, but there's a lot of unconscious stuff that's happening, and the research is in millimeters, okay, or milliseconds. It's people study 5 minutes over the course of their career. There's so much going on so fast. Facial expressions show movement, and any of you that have worked with maybe Moebius syndrome or Mobius syndrome, however you call it, these are people with agenesis of cranial nerves, and they have trouble blinking their eyes and smiling, and they don't have lines as they're aging. They don't have facial expressions, and they have a hard time. They might use their shoulders to show some expressivity. There's gestures of submission or respect that are kinesic. And for example, we'll talk as I move forward, we'll see more of that. So basically, kinesics refers to movement, body movement. Now, chronemics is the use of time to communicate, very underestimated. With punctuality, there's geographic and cultural differences. So the axiom is that the more southern you get in terms of states and countries in South America, the more likely it is for appointments to be late, delayed, for more than one thing scheduled at a time. And then there's cultural differences as well. So like for a party, when do you go to the party? Very different in New York City versus another region of the country, perhaps. And then there's also this in American culture, that time is money. And what's the session length, and that affects reimbursement. That's not the same in all cultures. Speaking pace, that's diagnostic. That's use of time to communicate. Now, time orientation. People often have different patterns of that. Some people are always in the past. Well, that's how grandma did it. Or let me think about how my family did that. Let me tell you how I used to do it. That's a past orientation. Someone who's primarily in the present, well, I don't need to save money. I just want to have fun. I'm just gonna, live for today. That's like more of a present orientation. Future orientation, always planning for the future, saving a lot, being concerned about getting good test scores, getting into school, saving for retirement. That's more of a future orientation. But hopefully most of us have a well integrated sense of time, that we understand the past, live in the present in a nice way, and also look forward to the future. So these are different chronemic patterns. Now, costuming is very communicative. It shows cleanliness, right? If you walk in and a client has dirty clothes, you might be concerned about them, like their living conditions or their psychological health or their support system. There's professional versus casual attire. And there's, if you read the Wall Street Journal, you'll see lots of content about that, which, what is now post-COVID acceptable professional attire. And then there's individual choice versus uniforms. The idea of uniforms is to show solidarity. We're uniform. We are, we're on the same team here. And yet people do manage to individualize their uniforms. And so you'll find it in the military. And military, gosh, wearing medals is kind of like wearing their resume. You can learn a lot about what they've done. In some schools, there are uniforms, and they can be pretty expensive for people too. Hospitals, lots of different colors, like one color is nurse, one color is the aide, one color is the doctor, one color is the pharmacist. And this may vary from institution to institution. So clothes are very communicative. Proxemics relates to space and communication. Now, in the United States, there are distance conventions. Intimate distance is 0 to 18 inches apart. And look, that may, be violated a bit for clinical purposes, right? Personal distance for family and friends is usually 18 inches to 4 feet. How do we know that? Well, we don't have rulers in front of us, but we unconsciously get it. There's social space for casual professional relationships, 4 to 10 feet. And public space for strangers over 10 feet. That's why it's so much fun to fly in an airplane, right? You got strangers on both sides of you, and they're in your intimate distance. Now there's a new category, COVID space requirements, which are 6 feet of social distancing. And there's still all those feet on the floor, even though it varies, I think, from site to site and state to state, how that's being observed. So Edward Hall, he's a very famous anthropologist, and he's written a whole lot of books. You can buy the paperbacks, and he's observed that British folks need a lot of space, and in the Middle Eastern Arab folks are more comfortable in closer spaces. I'm not sure that's still true about the British folks, but and of course there's class differences. So what happens is if someone is more comfortable with intimate space than you are or than I am, and we jump back when they come close to us, that is unsettling to them. So I've learned that in certain situations, I grit my teeth and I don't move too far back. Okay, I stay because I understand it's a cultural difference. Again, in healthcare rehab, we're often in intimate or personal spaces, and there's all kinds of rules about that, right? What you can touch, how you touch it, how long you touch, and for what purpose. So we learn the rules for that in clinical practice. And then there's status issues, like who gets the corner office, right? What happens, who's allowed in the elevator with someone of very high status? So proxemics, again, we learn that when we're in a place, and also like when you go for the when you go work somewhere in the beginning, you probably want to know where do people eat lunch? Do you bring your lunch? Do you go out for lunch? Do you sit together? How do you join a table? All this is has cultural rules attached. Now, organismics, those can be physical characteristics that can't be altered, or they're basically visible. So there you see the crayons, right? Different colors of crayons. That's sort of new to acknowledge that people have different skin color. And the same thing with thumbs up. I have a lot of friends who are African American are now using darker thumbs up. I feel like it would be kind of appropriation for me to do that. So I just use a neutral color. But remember, that's not acceptable in Iran to put your thumb up, okay? Nonverbal communication has a lot of differences from culture to culture. And let's say you're moving somewhere, you're working with a client, you want to, it's pretty much Googling, you'll find out pretty quickly. So now sex at birth or gender, maybe gender choices are different. Those would be organismic characteristics. Height, I've always wanted to be tall. People who are taller make more money, apparently. But if they're too tall, you're not supposed to be too tall. So height is really communicative. Weight, people who are too thin are often characterized as anorexic, and they may not be. People who are too heavy, too obese, according to the cultural expectations, and they're different even in the United States, can be very much discriminated against. Body type, that's another thing. I'm never going to look like an extremely thin looking person, but I'm kind of meso, and there's different body types that are characterized. So no matter what I do, I'm not changing my height. I'm not changing my body type. Age, that's something that, we can't change, right? I mean, it's good if you're just happy with your age. Skin color, that's, again, so much discrimination based on skin color, even in people of color, whether you're a lighter skin person or a darker skin person. Hair color, well, we can make some changes with that, to cover the gray and stuff, but hair color is communicative. Like, how much effort are you putting into that? Eye color can be changed with contact lenses, but generally, most people you pretty much look at them with their eye color. And some eye colors, you can get a better sense of their pupillar constriction. I had my dissertation advisor had blue eyes. And if I said something really stupid, her pupils would constrict like this, Betty J. McWilliams in cleft palate. And I figured out real fast, I better change my tune. And I said something to upset her. So I was always paying attention to that. But if someone has brown eyes, it's harder. Physical indicators of disability. Well, we know how people are stigmatized in our culture with that. And then there's perceptions of attractiveness, and they're pretty much culturally determined. And you can actually measure the face and get a sense of whether it's balanced, it's symmetrical in the midline, and whether the proportions are attractive in a specific society. Okay, so haptics relates to touch, and infants and elderly, because they're most vulnerable, they're not considered as powerful, are often touched without a role or a permission. Okay, so I like to go down to these. Here's my the T-shirt. If you didn't put it here, don't touch it. When I have two children in their 30s, and I'd hate it when people went and touched my belly when I was pregnant. It was pretty big too. That was a while ago, and it wasn't as acceptable to say, come on now, don't touch my belly. Don't touch my hair is a very, very racially upsetting. Okay, so we shouldn't be touching someone's hair, especially an African American or Black child. I asked my friend, who's the associate provost, what's appropriate to say, African American or Black? And she said, whatever you want. Okay. Please don't touch my baby. How about any of you who've had strolling with children, people come up and, oh, how cute, and they start to touch the baby. And I think that's pretty awful. So now people are getting more, vocal about that. And even dogs, okay, they feel comfortable petting service animals, and that's not, they're working. So now the higher status people are, the more comfortable they are touching someone of lower status. So if you're in a work site, you'll notice that, if you're with the principal, it's more acceptable for the principal to put his or her arm around you, and you wouldn't be doing that to your superior. Okay, I'm not saying that's appropriate or not. Now people are being very much more careful about their touch. But if someone's higher status, we're more likely not to initiate the touch. That's relationship related, of course. Now there's maps that show acceptable regions to touch as per relationships. And it's interesting because people with disabilities are not represented on these maps so much. You don't see a map of someone in a wheelchair. So you could see like the female subjects, the male subjects, taboo zones, the relationship. There's a lot of this stuff on the web. Okay, now this was an interesting to me, haptics violation and communication repair. Here we see Michelle Obama, who's a very warm and wonderful and haptic person. My God, she's touching the Queen, and she's wearing a cardigan. People were very upset with her. But look at what the Queen did on the bigger picture. The Queen did some communication repair. She went and put her arm around Michelle Obama's back. So this was an interesting violation that, people are schooled before they had met the, unfortunately departed Queen, about not touching, not talking first, because she was of much higher status. But the Queen was, very good at making all kinds of people feel comfortable. And I just love this picture. Now, let's move on to what we can smell, okay? Olfactics, smell and communication. Don't we love it when someone's cooking their fish in the microwave, okay, of the staff room? Yuck. All right, but olfactics is very primitive. I bet you can remember how your first school smelled, right? Or the gymnasium or the bathrooms. These are linked to early memories. I remember what my first grade teacher wore with a perfume. It was Chanel No. 5. And olfactics also has a lot to do with interpersonal attraction, okay? Who we decide that would be we want to mate with. There's a lot of literature on that. They call it chemistry, but a lot of it has to do with smell that we're unconsciously processing. The theory is that if we have a different immune system, we're attracted to someone with a different immune system, which makes sense, right? If one person gets sick, it's nice if the other person doesn't catch it and can take care of them. So now, to show how important olfactics is, if you walk into a department store, you know, they get the prime area. In magazine ads, they're starting not to have the ones with scents on them, which makes you nauseous if you're pregnant. They're, you know, or sensitive to smells. But look down, there are some perfumes here, and some of them are incredibly expensive, like over $800 for a small bottle, very profitable. And healthcare workers are advised not to wear perfume, and because of sensitivities and allergies and pregnancy, it could really make people feel sick. It could touch off people's migraines, chemotherapy. So you'll find in a hospital, people are often discouraged from wearing perfumes, and there's a kind of an antiseptic smell to make it seem like it's clean. This is a very important area for the future, but it's really hard to research. Like how do you measure the diffusion of the smell? But it's a really big deal in terms of making people feel happier or more comfortable or pain tolerant. Now we go back to the oculesics, nonverbal communication and the eyes. I talked about pupil dilation. When pupils get big, it's like you like something usually. And pupil constriction means you don't like it as much. Eye contact is really big, and it's an expression of respect or disrespect. And that was a real problem for Black students coming in, who had been in families where they were told, you show respect, don't look at someone, look down. But in the United States culture, you're supposed to look up. And so these kids were punished, and it was very confusing for them. In Arabic cultures, they make prolonged eye contact. Japan, Africa, Latin America avoid eye contact as a sign of respect. Now, of course, with intermarriage, the rules all change, but those are just some generalizations. Eye movement is also very interesting. And eye appearance, eye movement, some people can learn a lot about deception with that. Vocalics, that's our business, right? Voice characteristics and communication. Pitch, okay, how is the pitch related to someone's gender preferences? Vocal quality, breathy voice. Jacqueline Kennedy, always breathy. Vocal fry, we love that, right? I hope I'm not doing that today, but that's something that is aversive. Volume, someone has a hearing loss, you need to talk louder to them. It gives you a sense of their health, right? How loud, how much breath support they have. We talked about the gender preference, deception. Now, when I hear someone lie, I know it's a lie. The next time they have that same vocal characteristic, I can tell when they're lying usually. It's something that, once you know it for sure, you can sense it again, something to look for. And then voice banking is very important, right? With individuals who have degenerative conditions. Maybe voice banking will be, used for the whole population at some point. Objectics now, that's the use of objects to communicate. So here we have Madeline Albright. She had all these pins, beautiful book about her pins, and she'd communicate a lot wearing the pin. She didn't have to say stuff, but she would wear the pin, whether you could tell whether she was in a warlike mood or whatever. So think about what's on your office door and walls. Okay, what have you chosen to put up there? What's pictured on your coffee mug? I always ask my pharmacy students, when you go in for your first job, what's going to be on your coffee mug? Are you going to put a sports team? Well, would that be the team that people in your office would like? Are you going to put a cartoon character that make you look kind of silly? And so, a lot of them would say, I'm going to have some plain or a pharmacy logo. Do you carry a briefcase? Do you wear a badge? Do you put your personal photos in your office? And also, like, do you show them on Facebook and LinkedIn and all those other social media sites? Do you have plants in your office? So objectics are the use of objects to communicate, and we can be very intentional about that. Okay, so here's an example of one with a lot of rules is the flag, the United States flag. It's supposed to fly higher than a state flag. It has different forms for funerals. There's rules for displaying it. And I looked it up yesterday. Wow, there's so many rules for displaying it. If it's a certain kind of fabric, it could be up at night. So it was really interesting. Okay, now, so let's talk about, for a minute, subcultures. How many groups do you belong to? When I'm in front of an audience, people often can name 10 groups. I mean, we belong to a lot of groups that we may not think about. Each of those groups has like some cultural aspects to them. So there's the military, services and rank. It's interesting to teach a class with people of different ranks because sometimes the person of lower rank doesn't want to talk first. And you have to sort of say, well, ranks don't matter in here. Sports, gosh, each of these sports, soccer, football, hockey, baseball, tennis, pickleball, they have their own like clothing and terminology and pace. And it's, I found that when I was working with clients that were cared about sports, I try to go and learn something about them. Video gaming. Wow, that's really interesting. We don't often get exposure to that unless you're watching kids do it. A big culture that we can learn about. Hobbies, like, there's the knitting culture, the crocheting culture, the people that garden, there's do service, there's all kinds of different hobbies. Music is something that it's really hard to keep up, right? Like if you're watching Saturday Night Live, there may be a time when you don't know who the musical groups are, but it's important to keep abreast of the younger and different culture. Generational differences are another. One of the informants for this program, she had like lots of knowledge of the younger generation. I said, well, and she knew all the actors and the actresses and the movies and the songs and the groups. I said, how do you keep up? How do you do that? She said, well, I just read People magazine. I pay attention that way. So we all have our ways of kind of keeping up with generational differences. Gosh, professions, don't we have our own culture? As SLPs and audiologists, we really do. And part of our graduate education is to acculturate us to how we're supposed to talk and how we're supposed to act and how we're supposed to think of ourselves as part of a profession. And then, of course, there's religious cultures, and sometimes they conflict with some of the other cultures. And then there's the university culture, very strong. There's certain things that you learn about, like I'm like my calendars by the semester, by the term. I take my vacations based on that. Different other cultures, school systems may have very different schedules. So we have a lot to learn, don't we, about different groups that we're in. So now the question comes, does culture create disability? So, I have a daughter that was pretty dyslexic, and it was pretty rough on her until she finally we got her sorted out. And I always felt like, what if reading was not highly valued in our society? Wasn't it a shame that she had to read well in order to, to function in the society? And that's really societal. Our society's created that, right? Maybe if there's a society where there's no reading at all, reading wouldn't be as important. And what about physical disability? What if stairs were prohibited in any building? Wouldn't that be something else? Okay, that wheelchairs can go anywhere. They can get into the building. They can go around people, go around the building, without having special ramps put in. What if wheelchair users had higher socioeconomic status than an NBA basketball player? Okay, there's again height. I had a friend that was who was a wheelchair user, a very tall man, and he would always kind of mention what his height was, but you couldn't tell that in a wheelchair when he was sitting in a wheelchair, and I think that was hard on him. So now let's talk about oral communication. What if words were not needed to communicate? What if we could mind read? That's unusual, but what if AAC users were granted elite status? Okay, instead of someone who is broken or someone who needs our help. And what if silence was considered more precious than speaking? And hearing loss. What if acute olfaction was more highly valued than the sense of hearing? Lots of animals, they're more concerned with smell. So now what we want to do is resist ableism, the thinking that something about you or the way you communicate is wrong. And there's a great article about that in LSHSS, an ASHA publication. And they have a cartoon that I reproduced here. Things that people say that reflect ableism. They don't look disabled. Their classmates are so tolerant. What's wrong with them? Their speech was so smooth this time. Okay, how does that feel for someone who has a speech difference? And then we lost someone really precious last week. You may have heard of Judy Heumann. She was considered the mother of disability rights, and Washington Post said she's a badass. She wasn't allowed to go to school because she was in a wheelchair initially, and they would say, oh, it's going to catch on fire, and she wasn't allowed to teach because she was in a wheelchair. And she contested this, and she was important for the American with Disabilities Act. I've had the opportunity to meet her and hear her speak. Just a lovely person, and people were you may have seen her on the national news. She was really important. Even President Biden put out a statement about her. She was always fighting against ableism. So now let's switch a little bit and move to external factors that affect culture. There's things that happen in our world that we can't control, right? But we have to be alert to them. So like a pandemic, I was strangely writing about pandemics, maybe 10 years before one happened, in terms of how telepractice could be used, telerehabilitation could be used in a pandemic. And that was because I had a grandparent who lost a husband in the 1918 pandemic here. So I was reading about it, and I thought, we're going to have one of these again. And when it was real clear to me, when the signs were coming about it, I was telling my classes how we're going to proceed, even if we couldn't be together again. So you have to sort of look at the past and think about what could affect us, our culture. First of all, legislation affects liberty and healthcare, right? That's just a big fight right now. War has a devastating effect on culture. And some good things have happened because of war, in terms of new technology and the role of women having more job possibilities. But it's still it's terrible. The pandemic has shifted us greatly. Even we probably don't even realize it right now. We're sort of still in the middle of that trauma. Economic downturns, political elections, upheaval, and that creates a sense of security. Shootings on campus and in schools, changing the culture. What's our place in the universe? Okay, that we don't really know that right yet, but you know, we may change our view of humanity in the universe in the future. And then in a practical sense, what are factors that affect our employment? So let's say working in a school, it's a good idea to pay attention to the school board decisions, the tax base, and how many people are moving into the community. Can the school support the staff that it has? And there's other factors that affect our employment. Like, wouldn't it be wonderful if something came along that cured stuttering? I know that sounds like ableism, but stuttering wouldn't be on our caseload anymore. That would affect us. Stroke, you know, medication to prevent or obviate some of the effects of stroke has certainly changed our practice. Swallowing. When I went to school in the 70s, initially my undergrad, you know what, we weren't even talked about swallowing. Yuck, saliva. No one wanted to deal with saliva. Now, a large part of our profession is getting reimbursed for swallowing issues. So our profession's going to be, has changed, it will be changing. And how about hearing aids? Okay, over-the-counter hearing aids. That's going to have potentially a huge effect on audiology. It could affect their practice. It could affect how many students we get, which could affect the number of faculty we get. There's a lot of factors. And what we have to do is stay alert to the environment and the cultural changes. Now, here's a really big one that I haven't figured out yet what to do about it. Artificial intelligence. Although I did write about chatbots, again, about 20 years ago, because they were so interesting. Chatbot is an artificial intelligence technology. The computer can engage in human-like conversation, like in a chat interface. So there were some therapy chatbots that were kind of funny. It uses these natural language processing techniques, and it's getting really good at not only human text-like responses, but writing. And the question is, you know, what is going to happen in academics? They can write test questions. They could pass the LSAT. Students could write papers. You know, are we going to embrace this, or are we going to say you can't use it? Usually with technology shifts, it's not a good idea just to say we're not going to use it. So University of Pittsburgh has some really good resources for faculty. And what I'm doing right now is trying to make my assignments very specific so that, and I may actually, in teaching health communication, ask students to use some of this and assess it, because in the future, they're going to be asked to use it. Okay, so now I'm going to take a second to let's talk about our organizations that we're in and cultural competence. You know, there's some organizations that are a pleasure to be in and others that people say are toxic. And so if you're leading an organization or choosing an organization, you want to have one that has some cultural competence. So here are some, this is from ASHA's Cultural Competence Check-in. And so you want an inclusive mission statement, okay? Safe space policies, policies for conscious protections for staff. Let's say you report something that isn't going well, you protect the staff member. Training about culture, a procedure for handling inappropriate language or behavior, a culture that's actively recruiting to hire bilingual individuals and persons from underrepresented populations. So those are some culturally sensitive, culturally competent organizations do that. Plus there's more. Leadership is diverse, okay? People can look at people and recognize themselves who are not in the majority, and they have experience working with diverse populations. Now this is important. Promotion is based on job performance, not speaking standard American English, not having an accent, okay, a dialect. So what does someone do versus do they have a bit of an accent? I'll never forget doing, I went to Vanderbilt and I had a worse New Jersey accent than I do now. And they said to me, you got to do something about your speech. We don't want our babies talking like you. So I really, did my best to try to get more of a standard American accent. But here I am in New Jersey, and that's probably slipping away. In a culturally competent organization, healthcare is provided to an employee's domestic and lifeline partner, not just a legal husband or wife. The materials are health literate, and that means like they're low grade level, like 4th grade level. You can, if you put them through a readability analysis, which you can do, you take 100 words, you throw it into online. There's like a box, and it gives you the grade level. And there's different versions of that, but you want materials that are health literate, that don't use color to show meaning, because some people may be colorblind, right? And you want materials in many different languages. You want interpreters, of course, resources for them. You need make available different kinds of interpreters. And then religious and faith-based holidays are accommodated with days off and space. Okay, so not like I worked in a school of health and rehab sciences, and we were careful to give individuals who were Arab and religious a room to pray in. And one thing I learned was that, about Ramadan, there were times when some of my students have been fasting all day and it was really hot out. I learned when to take a break so they could eat, and to understand, what was happening with the different meals. So the more that we learn about this, the better. Okay, now we get to those cultural models, which I talked about in terms of the learning objectives. There's 3 of them we'll talk about. The third one's most important. This is like the old one, the cultural iceberg. It still resonates. There's some parts of culture that are easy to see, like language and dress and holidays and food, but there's a lot that are difficult to see, and we have to take time to learn them about a person, about a client and their family. Like, what are their family roles? Who makes the decisions in their family? Do you have to have a religious figure approve of what you're going to be doing? What about self-concept? What about gender roles? What's acceptable in the culture? Justice, pride, modesty. So, like, for example, notions of modesty. If I was meeting a man who was a Jewish and very religious Jewish man, he'd probably wear a yarmulke. He might have certain dress with tassels hanging out. It's pretty easy to tell. I would not offer my hand to shake his hand. He would be very uncomfortable with that. So you kind of learn what's acceptable to do in relative to another culture, but that you wouldn't know that unless you would had kind of had an informant or a part of the culture. So what about work ethic? Different for different cultures. When do you report to work? On time? Like, some individuals who are Native American don't follow holiday calendar, and they'll learn from the leaders. When it's a holiday, it might be the same day and they have to leave work. So those are things, they're difficult parts of the cultural iceberg. Now there's Gert Hofstede's 5 dimensions of culture. This is sort of older, but the concepts are interesting. One is power distance. How close can you get to someone of power? Okay, like, I don't think most of us would be close to President Biden, right? Or Kamala Harris, Vice President Harris. They're in power, and we wouldn't just walk up to them usually, walk in their office. So what's the power differential? Abraham Lincoln, though, people would knock on his door all the time and walk in his office. So the second one is individualism, collectivism. What do people in the society think of themselves and their own needs, or do they think of the bigger society? In the Ukraine, they've been talking about people just say, we're part of this society, we'll do what we have to do. And they just go ahead and do it. The same thing in Poland, taking in immigrants. So, that's a different, they're not as much individualistic in those actions. Masculinity, femininity, well, that's kind of binary, right? Either or. Things are getting different now in terms of how we look at it. We'll talk more about that. Uncertainty avoidance. Okay, what do people, are people cautious? Are they living right on the ocean? Are they, do they want to live near an earthquake? Do they want to jump out of the airplane? What is about the culture? Do they avoid uncertainty, things they can't predict or might be unsafe? Then there's the long-term versus short-term orientation, and we talked about that. So now this is an older view of this, but basically Hofstede has, you can go online and you can put in a culture, and they'll give you kind of a rating of where they stand in terms of power distance, whether they're individualism versus collectivism, and so on. That's kind of interesting, but again, it's very kind of monolithic in terms of a culture, and we know that cultures are not monolithic. So now the best, I think, model for us is Larry Purnell's healthcare cultural model, and he has different domains, and they really, I think, embody what's important. And again, that book will give you a view of that for a lot of different cultures. And so it's organized like this. I know it's hard to see, so I'm going to talk about them the next slide more, but there's different, I want you to see there's different circles, right? With global society on the outside, next community, next family, next person, and then different pieces of the pie. And so this model, and that a model means just how we organize the world. It's not perfect, it's just how we perceive culture. Each contains the development of awareness about culture. The first ring is the person. The second ring is the family. The third ring is the community. Now, when we see a client in a school, we may think first of the person, right? But we really need to understand the family and the community. And then this is relevant to the case study we'll talk about. I'm talking about the community culture in a school for the case study. And then the fourth and outermost ring is the global community. So you could see there's a lot of different subsections: occupation, religion, education, politics, ethnicity, nationality, gender, nutrition, pregnancy, death rituals, risky behavior. These are all subsections, and we have to understand them when we're working with a client to be fully culturally competent. And here I put it in again because on the bottom, I want you to see that there's a scale of competence, and unconsciously incompetent, consciously incompetent, consciously competent, and unconsciously competent. It sounds like that, I forget the actress that was consciously uncoupling. I think she stole that from here. So here's Purnell's levels of cultural competence. So if we're unconsciously incompetent, we're not aware that we lack knowledge about another culture. That's like a bad place to be. But we can pretty much assume that's where we are if we haven't studied the culture. Consciously incompetent, we're aware of lacking knowledge, okay? And we try to seek it out and become consciously competent. We learn about the culture. We verify generalizations that we have about the culture, and we provide culturally specific interventions. And then if things go really great, we are unconsciously competent. We just know what to do to offer culturally congruent care. And and there's a link there for some good resources for you. So I don't think we can say that we are across the board fall into one of these categories. I think it varies per culture. So the practice of cultural competency is an ethical imperative for speech-language pathologists and audiologists. And Gazit Chaya Nikosi, she has written a chapter for us for our book about LGBTQIA+ affirmative practice. And this is her wording: empowering our queer clients and families. I'm not too comfortable saying queer at this moment, but I believe that is terminology that's becoming the most acceptable. She says, the part of our professional ethics includes a commitment to ensuring that our personal beliefs do not become a barrier to our ability to provide affirmative and empowering care to each and every client we serve. Gazit identifies as non-binary, and she's a tremendous resource. So now she points out that there's all these cultural mismatches, and I think the ASHA website also points this out. Race, okay. ASHA members identify race as 91.7% white, and Black or African American, 3.5%. Asian American, 2.8%. And then if you look at this more in total, non-Hispanic or Latino, 94.7%. And that's really different than the population, our population, except in certain areas, but in general, the population of the United States. Language, there's a disconnect there. There are 5.9% bilingual service providers in ASHA. And of these, they're predominantly Spanish language providers. And it could be like there's 75 languages or so that are identified in here. So language is something that there's a great disconnect. Gender, the ASHA membership is overwhelmingly white and female, okay? If you look at leaders, that may not be as overwhelming in terms of gender, but it's, you know, we're definitely, if you go to a conference, you kind of go, wow, this is like the women's college I attended, okay? And then privilege, you know, we members of ASHA are, lots of members of ASHA have had some kind of privilege. So now how do we assess our implicit cultural bias? There's something called the Harvard Assessment Project Implicit. I'm not gonna advocate for this, but a lot of my students take it and they think it's kind of interesting. It's an association test that measures the strength of associations between concepts and evaluations. And it looks at all kinds of biases, like they report back that they don't like cats or dogs or something. But I think better is to use more authentic self-assessment. Like, do I have cross-group friendships? That may not be possible based on where you live and work, or where I live and work, but if not, would I be accepting of such friendships? How about for my children or loved ones? If my kids go to school, am I okay with them associating with a family that's different than myself? How about, do I care who sits next to me on a plane? I think that's a pretty big one. That's a good measure. I'm always baby friendly. I don't care if a kid's screaming next to me, but a lot of people, you know, are, they're very concerned about who's sitting next to them. Am I curious about other cultures? So do I try to learn about them? Do I try to experience them? Do I go to restaurants in their neighborhood, walk around their neighborhood, get a sense of where they live and their, you know, how they their commerce? And when I'm doing that, what's my emotional response to that? Am I apathetic? Do I experience joy, anxiety, fear, pride? How do I feel learning about different cultures and interacting with people that are different than ourselves? And so Dorian Lee Wilkerson and Shelley Shaban, Shelley was president of ASHA, and you might recall that. She's written about this with Dorian, and Dorian has again lectured to my class about it, fantastic. And she impresses that you need to examine your cultural humility, like assess your own privilege. Have you benefited from your race, your gender, your education, your height, your weight, your hair color, your ability to see, hear, talk, walk, swallow, and or your family's income? Like, yeah, like I never thought of myself as real privileged until I started to look at this and went, yeah, I really benefited from a family that, you know, valued education and had graduate degrees before I did. Assess your cultural knowledge and the source of your knowledge. Well, I went to a high school that was extremely diverse, and I'm so grateful for that. There were still divisions. That was a while ago in terms of the lunchroom, but there was, you know, a lot of friendships, and that's a source of a lot of my cultural knowledge. Not that it couldn't be more impressive. Assess your biases and prejudices. Okay, honestly, what don't I like? What am I biased against? What is that? Can I get past that? Determine your cultural competence, especially in AAC work. Are you eliminating bias, assessment bias in your eliminating bias in your assessment techniques, using measures and informal measures that are more inclusive? Do you participate in collaborative partnerships to promote DEI? Are you working with other faculty and staff and families? And DEI, of course, is diversity, equity, and inclusion. And then examine your cultural responsiveness. Are you trying to do no harm? Are you looking at the cultural background so that you do no harm? Do you include culturally relevant knowledge in your assessment and therapy techniques? And then if someone commits a microaggression, do you seek to be an ally with those targeted, or you just go along with it? So these are just some of the self-evaluation recommendations. So now, how do we increase our cultural competence? And I think it's kind of, I didn't plan this, but look, there's a white person there looking at people of different ethnicities. And how do we increase our cultural competence? Well, Mindel and Johnson, I told you, a wonderful book they wrote, and it's very current. They said to recognize that other cultures are diverse and valuable, and that we want to learn from them. And we recognize our own beliefs. And this is important, this is newer, collaborate with clients and their families. Okay, we learn about them. What is it? There's certain religions that are not excited about turning on electricity, during maybe the Sabbath, or carrying things during the Sabbath, or eating certain foods. I mean, we need to collaborate in order to find out those things. Do they have Wi-Fi? Is that part of their culture? Provide services that are in harmony with their values. And so the interesting thing is the journey to cultural humility is not a straight path. It's been considered more like a stairwell, like a spiral staircase that's like big at the top and goes down, is smaller at the bottom. So now we need to familiarize ourselves with things about the culture, like their food and mealtime norms. That has a lot to do with vocabulary, right? And pop music and culture, their holidays and festivals, and what that means. Their dialects. Dialects are part of a culture's identity. We need to embrace dialectal variations as acceptable. And I mentioned before with the corporate environment. So I lived about 35, 40 years in Pittsburgh. I grew up in Jersey, but I went to Pittsburgh and I learned to say yuns. And I was in Nashville, I like to say y'all. Gum bands, okay, that's something, if I said that here in New Jersey, people wouldn't quite know what I meant. I ask now for soda instead of pop. Okay, pop would be more in Pittsburgh, soda would be in Jersey. A sub sandwich is in New Jersey, a hoagie's in Pittsburgh. There's like dialectal variations and way more. Pittsburghese is just huge, and so is the New Jersey dialect. So now there's also these areas of concern based on religion. So diet, kosher and Arab cuisine are very similar. Sometimes they eat out of the same kitchens because some of the rules of how you kill an animal, mixing meat and milk, all that kind of stuff, mixing meat and dairy are similar. Not having pork. Ramadan meals are very specialized. I was looking that up before we started, and very interesting, the different meals. Prescription medication, there are kosher pharmacies, and the same for Arab cultures. They don't want certain items in the medications. Medical procedures are different for different groups, allowable for some versus another, and end-of-life decisions can differ. So we have to familiarize ourselves with the culture. We're never just working on one small sliver of things. So Mindel and John say, look, this takes some time. We have to build enough time into coaching. We have to be flexible and know that there's going to be interruptions. And there has to be small talk and personal sharing. A lot of cultures, like in Mexico, really concerned. You must, before you do business, you better go out for dinner with someone, have small talk, and learn about their culture, visit their sites, and share about your family. Very important. It's important to be culturally deferential, communicate real clearly, and be calm and curious. So those are some more cultural competent tips. And there's a few more gems for them, like interpreters may serve as cultural informants. I was helping as a volunteer with some immigration applications in Pittsburgh, and the interpreters just knew exactly what to do. They were really important. Adjust the skin tone of our symbols to match those of students. Look at the pictures on the Mindel and Jiva John book. Consider directionality of the language. So Hebrew and Arabic go right to left. English is left to right in terms of how it's read. So it's a little confusing for people who, like me, who are directionally impaired, but I learned to do both. And can include a customized vocabulary, like for food. Food's really important. Okay, so now as AAC providers, I'm sure that many of you are doing partner training, and the recommendation is to do this from an empowerment perspective. What's the family's education? What's their acculturation? What about their socioeconomic status? Where do they live? What do they believe about disability and special education? Establish an ongoing consultation time so you keep in touch. And this I thought was really interesting, to recognize the powerful role of siblings, because siblings will communicate with the client. If an interpreter is needed, they should be included in as many meetings as possible. Brief them ahead of time about the purpose of the session, engage them as a professional. But of course, their job is not to give advice, it's to interpret what they're hearing. Attend to the nonverbal communication, signs of disagreement, which may be very subtle and different for different cultures. Tolerate silence and wait time, and focus on the family relationships rather than on business. So these relate to partner training. And then some solutions. Less is more often. So if you're instructing about technology, do it more often, but in smaller bites. Identify existing routines and then the communication opportunities around them. Use vocabulary that's simplistic and be willing to repeat it in short phrases. And I think this is a really important one, incorporate ideas and activities that coincide with families' cultural holidays, events, food, and music. So again, this requires some cultural curiosity on our part. Now, in terms of technology, there's a big technology divide because some families have limited exposure to technology. Why is that? Well, they could be economically disadvantaged or have a lack of literacy or education. And I'm just editing a paper that has to do with a religious population, speakers of Yiddish, actually. Not all Jewish people are in this situation. But in New York, there was a problem with continuity of care and having them adopt telepractice. It was because a lot of them didn't have Wi-Fi in their homes. And like the Amish, okay, may not be as interested in technology. So you have to look at what's the cultural view of technology. Here's a lot of issues that come up in most cultures. Charging issues. They don't understand they have to regularly charge the devices, right? They have difficulties with the ports and the connectors. Hardware challenges. How do you turn it on? How do you turn it off? How do you deal with locked screens? What about the volume buttons? Now, I live with a really sharp 99-year-old World War II veteran who used to be an engineer. And let me tell you, he has trouble with these screens and volume buttons and turning the phone on. And he wrote about stuff like that. So hardware challenges can be very rough for persons of an older generation. Parental control settings, don't know how to manage those, some people. What about updates for apps or software? Some of them, people don't get that. They could delete software or applications by mistake. They could reset your customized settings. They may not understand wireless connections, Bluetooth to speakers. They may not be familiar with the basics of navigation. So there's a huge technology divide. I think it relates to so many things, the culture, the religion, age in some cases. And so, you know, this is part of culture. So now it's important to choose culturally sensitive words and visuals for an AAC device. Now we're going to move to vocabulary. And I think this is really, if there's one thing from this presentation, it's that cultures are not monolithic. So beware of generalizations, okay? You know, you can read all you want about a culture in this book, but it's different, you know, it really can differ. And there's so many factors that go into a culture. So here's some things to think about. What are subjects that are sensitive and must remain unspoken in a culture? For example, in Florida schools, okay, if you're working in a school system and you're selecting vocabulary, I would be careful about putting certain words into the devices. Fine if someone else wants to, if a family member or you know, another kind of aide wants to do it, but I'd be careful. And what subjects are sensitive in the religion that you wouldn't want to mention? It might be the leader of the opposite political party even. How do you address elders in the culture? So I know, like one of my friends said, well, you know, I was sitting in the waiting room with my mother, and she's Black, and she said, and they called her name Melissa, and she didn't respond, and she was very upset. Well, you always say Miss Melissa, okay? You call someone ma'am. You don't address an elder by just their first name. I know that there's confidentiality issues. You don't want to say their last name, but there's ways to address elders in different cultures. How does a person's perceived gender influence their communication preferences? We'll talk more about that as we move ahead. What about loss of a loved one? How long do they grieve for? What form does it take? Differ for different cultures and different personalities. How does the person view technology in general? And AAC tech, again, some cultures not interested in the technology. How do they celebrate birthdays? I have a friend who's of a religion, she doesn't have a birthday. She doesn't celebrate her birthday. And she doesn't vote either. How does the culture regard US culture? So these are things we have to understand about a person who uses AAC and their partners. There's also the issue of language diversity. What about multilingual AAC? Now, I'm not an expert in this, okay, but I'm sure that most of you who are working in the field are sophisticated in bilingual speech development. What are some of the barriers? American English is the official language at most schools, but there's no official national language as there is in some other countries. Most commercially available AAC devices are designed for English. Most SLPs are monolingual speakers. We covered that before. And then there's the school-based culture wars and attitudes that white culture is superior. And I've watched that happen based on what a school board is, their political leanings. It may not be monolithic across even a city or a state. So what happens with these barriers is that we can select inappropriate language selection, and something awful that we see too much of is device abandonment. Okay, so now when you're thinking about devices, there's vocabulary for a Jewish user's AAC device. This was done by Karen Golding Kushner. She's an ASHA fellow. She's pretty religious, okay? So in Judaism, there's like conservative, well, let's see, there's like reformed, There's conservative, there's orthodox, and there's different variations among that. This is more of an orthodox viewpoint. Not everyone's orthodox in the Jewish religion, but the words that someone who would want, who's very religious, they want to, how the deity is referred to. Okay, in the Jewish religion, you don't write out God because it's so holy. You go G-D, and there's different words, and I'm not even familiar with what Karen Golding would be using. There's titles of religious leaders and other key figures like Rabbi, Reb, things that we read and write like the Torah, and more than that, ritual objects and related things like a Havdalah candle is something at the end of Sabbath, Shabbos that is burned. What we do and we say, holidays and celebrations. Where do we go? We go to the synagogue. How do we study together? What are the key prayers and blessings and names of services? Again, I'm not up on all this, but there's a huge amount of vocabulary that a religious Jewish individual may want. There's lifespan topics, food, and who we are. So this is, vocabulary for a Jewish user's AAC device. There's a whole lot of stuff to learn if they're interested. For Christian users AAC device, my friend Jack Gary's provided this in a chapter. Wow, there's so many phrases, okay, that I wouldn't even think of, but I would, refer to this list and see what would be important to the person. So I think you could scan this real quickly. There's more. Some of it's similar for religions, but lots of it are different. And there's even more. And this is just a part of it. So a Christian user might want AAC terms that are comfortable. And it's interesting, I think in a hospital, the chaplains there, they are very attuned to other religions. It's really great. You can ask them about many religions and they'll be conversant. So, there's a lot of different resources that you can relate to. Online stuff, religious leaders. No one will think less of one of us if we call up a religious leader and ask a question. And then there's Muslim users of AAC. And so my friend from Amal Maghazel, she's now returned to Saudi. She studied it in Pittsburgh. She said that it's best to start by asking, do you speak Arabic? If they say yes, you ask what dialect they speak. There's, some people will want some of that on their AAC device, some not. And you want to find out whether they use an Arabic or a Persian version. And again, if someone emailed her and asked a question, she would be helpful. And then, so she has supplied some selected religious vocabulary. And it's interesting because some of it is very similar to Hebrew. See, halal, well, that's same as kosher, similar to kosher. Abu, father of, is that's similar. So, it's, and look at the diacriticals in there. So now, culture and school practice laws can vary state by state. We know that. School boards, legislators, governors, they've been asserting more control over what can be stated, what can be taught, what can be read. We got to keep track of that, of course. But they don't keep track of what family members or aides can add to the AAC devices. So that's a way around this. But keep in mind, keep that in mind, however, but there's some cautions when considering LGBT clients. So again, observe the laws. That used to be part of the ASHA Code of Ethics. I'm not sure it's explicit in the new version. And remember that culture can change on a dime or on an election. So it's really important to keep in touch with what's going on. Now, this is material that my friend supplied. And here's some ways to show that you're an LGBTQ plus affirmative provider. Signs that ensure client confidentiality, safe space stickers, signs which incorporate a rainbow flag or transgender pride flag, the gender unicorn chart, I'm not sure what that one is, pins or name tags that list our name and pronouns. Okay, so I know a principal that was wearing, never mentioned LGBTQ issues, but was wearing an ally symbol, and he got in a lot of trouble. They didn't say it was for that, but he sort of got fired. So you have to really think about your environment and what you're putting up and what you're willing to risk. I'm not recommending anything. In my office, I always had some indication that I was an ally. I goofed that up here. Too much reading here. An ally, sorry. Okay, so some people are using, a lot of people, pronouns, they, them, theirs, or some pronouns like ze, they, that they're totally neutral. I don't use pronouns because I don't want someone to feel obligated to declare what their gender preference is. But a lot of people feel that use of pronouns shows that you are inclusive. So I think that's still a judgment call. I mean, I know enough people that don't want people to know. And so we can also advocate for gender neutral restroom options, right? That's really important. And also like options for nursing, spaces for lactation are really important. We can provide spaces in our materials and forms. An intake form is really important, sets the tone. Like what's their legal name, their preferred name, pronouns, sex assigned at birth, and gender preference, okay? Parent 1 and 2 rather than mother and father, siblings or children rather than sisters, brothers, son, and daughter. Include partnered as an optional and with married, divorced. And some people may not want a legal marriage. So our books, it's important that our books and visuals show all kinds of families and relationships and children. I know that's becoming more difficult now. So we have to be concerned about safety and discretion for our users. It's certainly in the scope of practice that we practice in an affirmative manner, but we have to be aware that there's often significant risk associated with disclosing someone's queer identity. And this is from Gazit. That can cause significant safety risks, family connections, social standing, legal standing, housing, and job security. So we shouldn't rely on a person to out themselves or reveal their queer identity. Simultaneously, it's really important that we don't out our clients or their identity without explicit permission, even to their parents, their family members, and significant others. Some school districts prohibit that. You can't, you find out someone's preferred name in the school, but you're not allowed to use that outside of the school. Okay, so it's important to ask your client what pronouns they would like to use, what their name or identity, and which settings they would like to use that in. Do they want to use it just at school, or would they use it at home or at work? Now, this was, you could play this on your own, but MasterCard is now giving true name cards. They display a user's chosen name. So I think this is really amazing for trans and non-binary users. Now, I teach a course on gender communication, and I can tell you there's like, gosh, 200 at least terms that I have identified, but these are some of the major terms. And a good source for this is Boston-based Fenway Health. Great, look at that. I mean, it has a lot of videos of trans folks and what they go through, and it says, you know, things will get better, and it talks a lot about their needs and vocabulary. UCLA has a lot of materials online. Some schools, some universities are very LGBTQ friendly, and they have a lot of materials online, and others just pretty much ignore it. So it's important, like AFAB, assigned female at birth, assigned male at birth. Let's see, gender, cisgender, pretty much, you know, I guess I would say I'm a cisgender woman, and gender, I'm binary, I'm gender binary, and then this shows transitions, female to male, transgender man, male to female, transgender woman. So this is a specific vocabulary. Whether or not you feel comfortable with this or believe in it, it's still really important to you know, have a sense of it. So we should work very specifically with the person, the client, and use vocabulary that's relevant to their identity and their sexual orientation, that they want to, how they want to be identified. It will be specific to every AAC user. We need to follow the guidance of a client, and that's the work by Gazit, Kaya, Nikosi. So now, again, there are so many constituents across the environments, and I'm not going to repeat this. We've talked about it already. So now we go to our case study. And this is kind of fun, I think. I don't know if any of you watch Abbott Elementary. I enjoy that. But this case study takes place in a school, elementary school. And the solutions provided by Catherine Fredericks. She is residence certified, and she's a LAMP certified professional. She studied with Bruce Baker in Pittsburgh, and she just retired actually from Pines Lake Elementary School. And there you can contact her if you want. So here's the hypothetical case study, but the solution's actual. Okay, so Jason's 11 years old in the 5th grade. He's dysarthric and unintelligible. He is mainstreamed. He is a lifelong AAC user, depends on his high-tech AAC device to communicate with peers and his teacher. The school-based SLP works with Jason individually once a week in a pull-out model. His teacher's really afraid of Jason's expensive AAC device, doesn't want to get it broken or lost. So when Jason comes in, the SLP takes the device and puts it up on a shelf, so he can't use it. Jason can't use it. Jason can't communicate with the teacher. He's excluded from conversations and activities. He has no way to verbally participate. Now, I hear this a lot, where a device comes to school and is put on a shelf somewhere. And there's my informant, Catherine Fredericks, who's New Jersey 2023 Clinician of the Year, actually. And I'll show you some more of her stuff in a second. So one question, is an individual's pull-out services the best option for Jason? She says both, do both. Do pull-out therapy in a small group with verbal students working on similar language socialization goals, again, integrating into the population, and push-in services in authentic school settings, okay? She's very authentic. And she was teaching all 5th grade students about AAC devices. How do they interact with AAC users? It's like waiting until they compose what they want to say instead of saying hi and walking away. Giving them multiple mainstream opportunities every day, pairing them with one or more peer communication partners, and sharing the ASHA Communication Bill of Rights with all 5th grade classes. And students discussing with their teachers how those rights are reflected in the school community. So she's educating our next generation of SLPs. It's pretty amazing. And she creates an accepting community. She's partnered with teachers, especially the principal, families, district leaders, to change the culture of acceptance of AAC and AAC users. Teachers and staff receive in-service training. She says the principle is key to change. New ideas need to be allowed by administration. I've met this principal, and yes, this person is incredible. He doesn't only accept AAC. He has changed the architecture of the school so that kids in special ed are in the same hallway with kids who are mainstreamed, and they get to see each other when, in the hallway. He's had school days of, let's go out and play in the snow together. I guess we can't do that in Florida, right? But he has all kinds of activities to get the school together. And so she talks about once you get a passionate SLP and one positive-minded teacher to start, others start to progress in the school. And she includes everyone, the custodial staff, the luncheon staff, the playground aides. I'm not sure what CST members are, bus driver. And she said that she showed that one student emailed the director and assistant director of special ed. That student actually ran for vice president of the student council and won, and gives announcements over the loudspeaker. So the students also, what she's done is they in 5th grade, they make and use simple low-tech eye gaze systems, and they get hands-on experience with higher level AAC. They participate during what's called Fundations, which is a phonics program. They use the students who use AAC for communication also use the email feature, and very motivating for the students and the teachers and the families. And then the students who use AAC have speaking parts during grade level shows and 5th grade graduation, give a graduation speech. They often deliver the morning announcements at the beginning of the school day. They can tell jokes with their devices on the morning announcements, just like their peers. And there's an AAC Awareness Month for the entire month of October. So you may all be doing stuff like this, but I thought it was pretty cool. I didn't know about all this. Students interacted with Chris Klein, an adult AAC user who's contributed a chapter to our book. And he's supposed to be very motivating and wrote a wonderful chapter. And they felt this was a very, very powerful presentation to the 5th graders to see how a sophisticated AAC user communicates. Excuse me. High school students are engaged for called Club Communicore, and families can come in. They're learning how to become communication partners. There's a lunch buddy program where volunteer high school students the National Honor Society are trained to use AAC with users, and it's created ongoing friendships. Now this is, she's very well known, Catherine, for this. She's created playground communication boards, and some of them are bilingual, and she's offered a template for that on the New Jersey Speech and NJISHA, it's called, website. So if you ever want to do that, I think it's an incredible project for students who are in NSHLA or for small fundraising groups. It's really cool. And they give lots of advice on how to put them up and how to develop them. So we have attestations, let me check the time, by teachers, and you could read this on your own. They just say that this is the most inclusive school they've ever been at, and the CF was trained in this. And so I want to leave some time for questions. So I will thank you for attending and hope this is valuable. And I guess Julie or Carolyn will give me some questions or comments. Comments are fine too.
Ellen,
I'm not hearing you.
Thank you so much, Ellen, for the talk you're giving. It was wonderful.
My pleasure.
Julie, did you have any questions from the chat for us?
None that were coming in that hadn't been sort of more of discussion points between a couple of our participants. We're getting a lot of thank yous. Great, informative. Thank you so much. Let's see, we do have one from Jim, and he asks, what do you do when you get pushback from supporting cultural competencies, like from a school district in particular? So how do you handle pushback that you might get?
Pushback from school districts?
That's correct, yes, if I'm interpreting the question properly.
Well, that's a tough one. I think it depends on the culture of the school and the state laws, but I would take it seriously and think if there's a way to engage in education or to move around the issue in a different manner, that I think we don't want to be in a position where we have people standing up at the school board meetings and complaining about us. I think there's ways around it. Let's say there's pushback on vocabulary. We don't have to be the ones to add the vocabulary. It could be a parent or an aide. So and then there's also modeling. If there's an administrator that's very supportive, or another teacher, sometimes they'll model for the rest of the population, the work population. That's a really tough question. It's so situational. I'm sorry, Jim, I probably haven't answered it, but that's pretty tough.
Thanks, Ellen. I think it is a particularly challenging question for many different reasons. So if anyone in the audience wants to chime in, we're happy to make this a conversation as well, to expand the Q&A portion. Maybe while folks are thinking about that, another question came in from one of our participants. Out of curiosity, how do you, Ellen, teach grammar rules, specifically with pronouns he, she, they, as they're changing, and or rather how we're using pronouns is changing? Have you changed the way that you teach grammar to accommodate for those cultural shifts?
Oh my, that's terrific. Yeah, that's a terrific
and
question.
Changes in awareness.
I guess first of all, I don't teach grammar. I correct it. Unfortunately, I wish someone had taught them grammar. But that's really interesting. I don't know. I guess it also depends where you're teaching. I don't know if I would, teach that in a Florida school right now, but I think that's really fantastic for a grammar textbook. I think that is a great question. You should publish on that.
We have another question that came in from the audience. Do you have any suggestions for how we can recruit a more diverse SLP community to better match the culture in which we're residing?
Yeah, we've been trying that. And the problem is, I think we do it too late. We do it, maybe in junior high or in 5th or 6th grade, when students are not having, getting math skills and science skills. It has to start really early. And so we've had visitors that come through and watch our programs, and I'm not sure that the follow through is really good. I think I think the kids see relevance. When I've gone to an elementary school and I say, tell me what, have you ever met someone who does what I do, a speech teacher, a speech pathologist? They'll raise their hands and say, yeah, my grandma had a stroke. And so when there's some relevance to it, I think that makes a difference. But the education has to start really early on, because in order to progress academically, the STEM skills have to be built early. So that's what I recommend. We don't have a good solution to that yet. There's recruitment. I mean, of course, offering money for people, having money to attend programs, that's very big. If there's grants, a program will often attract some students. Having faculty that are people of color makes a big difference. And students know if a community is accepting or not. The word gets around. Oh, I don't want to go to that city. They're not very nice. I'll go to this other city. Then there's some incredible programs. There's some in Baltimore, was one or two in Baltimore, where the students are brought in and university students of color brought in, working in research labs. They're very well trained. So, you know, we're not very good at it yet.
Thank you, Ellen. I just want to point out that Sherry has mentioned she and colleagues, it sounds like, did a program called SLASH last summer for high school students, which stands for Students Learning About Speech and Hearing for cultural diverse students, and that it was pretty successful. So Sherry, if you have any additional resources that you want to drop in the chat, I'm sure many of our participants would appreciate hearing more about that program. We do have a hand raised. Oh, I'm sorry, Ellen, go ahead.
I'll be real quick. Another has to do with admission requirements. Looking, I think, at holistic admission rather than test scores is important. And I'm not sure that a high test score really matters in terms of success in the program. That looking at someone's experience is very useful.
Agreed. We do have someone with their hand raised. I don't see a name. I just see Zoom user. So we'll leave a spot for you to join in.
Hi, my name is Jamie. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hello?
Yes, we can.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Jamie.
Thank you. Thank you, Ellen. Thank you, everyone. I'm just wanting to bring out the representation of a BIPOC person. I'm actually a person of color, and I think that a lot of times that the culture, stigma, and linguistic are things that are major barriers for us to be able to participate fully, to be able to have the same understanding, because as we all know, the expert knows that there's no one size that fits all. Having a representation from people of color, a person who actually have lived experience like a peer, will help the student be actually a bit more like able to participate. Sometimes it's not trying to sense and things like that. I'm sure you all know, but I just think that giving a more deconstruct of the systemic approach, I think it will help to remove a lot of barriers and have a better, deeper dive into collaboration. And as we all know, cultural humility is a lifelong thing. So people are quick to diagnose, say, oh, I have 4 hours of cultural competence training. I'm actually already done with it, right? So it's never that. So that's why I say we need to do a little bit better. And also talk about the uncomfortable conversations that actually really provoke you and say, oh, it's uncomfortable, but we need to talk about it if you want to promote healing and provide kind of a more intersectionality and representation from an individual. So this is a little idea I thought I can share with you.
That couldn't be better stated. Thank you. So true. And as speech pathologists, we should be good at that, right? We're supposed to be good communicators. So that was really wonderful. Thank you.
I also asked if one of these days, if you have a moment, I'm going to send you an email. Maybe we can have a little Zoom chat if possible, just to have a little bit deeper dive to hear your perspectives on certain things that we have done, whether that would be something that can be enhanced.
My pleasure.
Thank you, Dr.
That is a great segue. I'm going to share, Ellen, if I could have the screen back just because of the time. I'm going to share just a couple of quick slides. I'm going to have our contact information there, and then you are going to receive an email after this presentation that will have Dr. Cohn's slides, and we'll also have our contact information on that email. So please feel free to reach out.
But please don't put my slides on Facebook.
Yes, those are
Okay.
strictly for the attendees of this presentation.
Thanks.
All right. All right, so very quickly, as mentioned, if we are going to drop in the chat, we do have a post-session survey as well with information about the content that you watched today. And again, a huge thank you, Dr. Cohn, for all the time put into this presentation and all the wonderful resources that you shared throughout. Thank you for that.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.
We are offering, as mentioned, free ASHA CEUs for this event. If you completed all of the fields at sign up, we should have the information required, but I will also be emailing the email address used for registration, will have attached a CEU form that you can fill out and send back to me with the information that we need. So please keep an eye out for that to make sure that we get you your CEUs. As mentioned, here's the contact information for myself, Dr. Firestein, Dr. Cohn. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. We appreciate everybody's time today and hope you enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Bye, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.